managing breaking change pain, like if you've never experienced it, is such a big problem. That is why we spend so much time and rigor in the first place trying to figure out how to not break things. Because in my world, when you make an API, it lasts forever. It's pretty much forever. You can't remove it.
Hey everybody, it's Derek Martin from CodeOpinion.com. Have you ever wondered how the .NET team builds new libraries, frameworks, and tools? Well, I got to sit down with David Fowler at Microsoft Build to talk exactly that. Design, prototypes, and building long-lasting developer tools. We talk about designing for experience, smart defaults, not traps, and how you strike that balance between flexibility and performance. And we go a little off the rails talking about the dogma that seems to plague the industry. It was a fascinating way to get insights into David Fowler and how he thinks about design. I love the conversation. I think you will too.
So David, thanks. I want to talk about design, obviously, but I want to take it a little bit kind of abstract to start, and then we'll put it into the things you work on because they're so out of my realm.
Yep.
Right? Like I'm in a completely different domain than you are. I assume a lot of people that watch my channel are also in various domains. I get messages like whether in insurance, a lot of it's that, healthcare, whatever the case may be, right? And you're in the domain of, I would say, developer experience.
This is right.
Is that what you
developer experience, developer tools?
Yeah.
I say developer tools, frameworks, and services. Kind of that
smorgasbord
of things, yeah.
So I guess my kind of, like I said, a little bit more abstractly, and then we'll get into specifics, mainly like we can use the context of Aspire in that, is how do you think about when you guys are when you're about to build something, when you're about designing something, like what's top of mind? Like do you have goalposts? Like do you have certain kind of ideas that you want to follow? Just design in general, what you're thinking about.
Yeah. So I'll kind of piece together stories from, I guess, my career thus far. I built a lot of V1 projects, right? Kind of going from 0 to 1, like inception to first version to then like have it last for a long time. Then you figure out what you did wrong with it. And I would say like the common pattern is getting to an outcome initially. So I don't typically start off thinking about the overarching design that has to last 50 years. I'm trying to figure out if the POC is even worth chasing down. So you're looking for kind of the first, what we call Damien's like click stops. First click stop is what is the outcome you think you want to get to? So in Aspire's context, it was like, what is the end demo, right? And we laugh about making something that only works for demos, but that helps drive clarity as to what we have to build. So you kind of reverse engineer how do we get all the pieces required to get that experience. So I'd say a lot of what I've worked on in my career has been like API design, tool design, experience design, and we start from the experience. So minimal APIs. It was me and Damien sat down and wrote a gist of the code we wanted to end up having developers write. And then the entire year was spent trying to make that work, right? Language features in the runtime, features in like all kinds of things to make it work end to end. And I think we have that. We're trying to get to an outcome of some sort, some experience, some tool chain, some end to end. And we'll figure out how to get there along the way, but we're not doing this upfront design that's like, here's a super robust design to get to X, Y, and Z. It's more like, that's the end state. What do we have to build to get back there from that end state?
So when you think about that end goal, how clear is it?
Depending on how much work was done beforehand. So what will typically happen in like one of these new projects is we'll build 4 or 5 prototypes, and they're throwaway code, right? So you're just trying to figure out some path to get there, and it's not always clear. It's like often very fuzzy.
So it's iterative. You're exploring.
Mm-hmm. Exploratory.
Yeah.
Aspire was one of the fuzziest.
Okay, elaborate.
Of what I've ever worked on, one of the fuzziest things I think it was. We knew we had Project Thai that was like 5 years before, and we kind of understood what that was, and we knew we had kind of these internal teams trying to build a platform for building scalable services, and we knew there was something there, but it wasn't clear if we should combine 2 things, should we have a different thing. So we tried some stuff. One of the things we do often at Microsoft is we'll have offsites where we'll go off for a whole day with a small crew of people, and we'll sit in a room and whiteboard something. And we had one for distributed systems. It was like, what are the problems? and we sit on the whiteboard and talk about problems from a first principle standpoint. What is hard about this? When you configure A and B to talk, like what's hard? Why is it hard? Where do you fall over? And we kind of went for a whole day. We sat in a room and just like argued about this stuff. And we came out with what the app post is today. We actually came out saying, if you could describe all your relationships in a single place, then we can do stuff. That was like the premise.
Yeah.
And we didn't even know what shape it would take. Was it YAML? Was it code? That was not decided. What we decided was like the core idea of what we want to solve. And then we had engineers go off and try different things. And then one of them looked really good, and it was okay. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. How much experimentation goes on.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And
I think
that
part
evolves.
of my job very specifically is that experimentation. So like I have the luxury of I don't want to say not having to be in the day-to-day operations of different projects. Like I code every day. I tell everyone I code every day, but it's not my job to code every day, right? I have to set direction, make sure we're on the right path. So I spend a lot of my time out in front charting a course for what's next, trying to figure out how to take what we have right now and move it forward. So I spend a lot of my time trying to experiment to figure out with what we have, what we know so far from customer usage, from what we have, how do we evolve the stack to go forward and do more scenarios. Yeah.
So once you get to a point where, okay, we know kind of the path for what we're working on right now, and you really get into, let's say, like some API that you're building that ultimately I'm going to end up using,
Yep.
right? Like the concrete ideas of what the APIs are going to look like, the shape of them.
Yep.
Like how does that all evolve?
Evolve.
Yeah.
So if you look at the .NET repositories, there's this API design like guideline sheet.
Yep.
And I tell people when you work on these platform teams, we consider APIs like APIs that you use in .NET, like that's the product. So the amount of rigor that goes into like API design is insane.
Yeah.
It's not as though, so imagine shipping a service or shipping some backend that's a detail of the actual experience. Our experience is the API, the documentation, how you use it. So we care a lot about things that people just don't think about. Names of parameters,
Well, yeah.
order of parameters,
Correct,
like
yeah.
to a level of detail where it's like, it seems insane. An hour goes by and we're talking about two APIs.
Okay, that's good to know though, because that's what I was kind of curious of like how much kind of
The rigor is crazy.
yeah.
I would say for newer projects, that level of rigor is difficult because you want to move fast. When we first did ASP.NET Core, if you're listening and you've used ASP.NET Core, I'm sorry, between 1 or 2.1 and like 2. Because it was 2 and 2.1 or 1.1 and 2, like we broke the auth APIs ridiculously.
Yeah.
And I would say back in those days, like I'll blame myself, we were moving fast and we just figured it's new. There aren't many users yet. If we bake in this design, we are screwed forever. So break it once and then like move on. Managing breaking change pain, like if you've never experienced it, is such a big problem. That is why we spend so much time and rigor in the first place trying to figure out how to not break things. Because in my world, when you make an API, it lasts forever. It's pretty much forever. You can't remove it, right?
Yeah.
You can build new ones. You can obsolete things now, right? We haven't
Yeah.
done that before, but now we're doing obsoletions. And there's a very conservative nature when we think about public APIs. So culturally, that's a big thing.
Yeah, I talk about it a little bit in the sense of kind of how you can evolve, not to your degree of like those type, more like HTTP APIs, events, like what message contracts look like.
Yep.
And it's you gotta get it right.
It's
to a
similar.
degree. Yeah, it's very similar. Depending on if, in a lot of contexts, I think people are working on is a lot of it you're consuming yourself. So
Yeah,
you can
internal.
get away. Yeah, you can get away with. Well, I am the producer and the consumer,
Yep.
so you can kind of get away with it. But
Yep.
so like with Aspire, well, let's jump back a little bit before I get into that. Is there's kind of this trade-off, like speaking of the API's design of, I want to guide people down a path that we see the vision for,
Yep.
but there's this kind of fine line of,
Magic.
well, that as well as, okay, here's the path that we think is the better way or
Yeah.
how this should work.
Yep.
And then people are always going to want to or have different use cases that maybe you never thought of. So you kind of have to open it up a little bit for them to kind of get off the path a little bit without it turning into a foot gun.
Yep.
So how do you guys how do you feel about striking that balance? Is it one of those things where like, well, we don't want to do this because, or is it, hey, open it up? Like
Both. So early on in like .NET world, MVC, open source world, you're thinking about, we want the whole thing to be open. Everything's virtual. Everything's overwritable. And over time, you begin to understand the cost of that from a maintenance standpoint. If we want to optimize this code path, now we made it virtual. We can't. There's user code running between us and us, right?
Yeah.
So I would say we designed quite a few systems where we made all the mistakes. I remember specifically for Signaler, the client API, we would trigger callbacks to say like, you're going to reconnect now. You're gonna slow connection. And we used to run those interleaved with our own code. And the amount of deadlocks, the amount of like problems that happened because people were going to do things that we didn't understand at that point in time, informed the design in the future that was like, okay, this new client, we're going to make sure that class of problem goes away. So we kind of have this mixture of experience versus what we want people to what we want people to be able to accomplish. That drives like API design, what's open, how much is open. Will that prevent future optimizations? We do this trick a lot where we have DI everywhere now in .NET, and we'll do a thing where it says, if we know the default implementation is X, we'll cut all this stuff out. But if you replace it, the perf is, you get control, but you've lost all the performance. So we've been doing those kinds of trade-offs over time because we want the system to be flexible, and we want interfaces that are well-defined and contracts that are well-defined. But we want to optimize the crap out of like the default case. So how do you build a system that like runs really fast when you know everything versus the user replace 4 parts? Like, what happens here now?
Yeah. So like then to go specifically kind of in that mode with Aspire a little bit is, do you think it's opinionated?
I think it started off more opinionated.
This is kind of where I'm going. Like, do you think at the start something kind of has to be to a degree and then you kind of like we're talking about, like as versions, as you see more use cases, people are actually using it, it could kind of change its shape a little bit?
We fought ourselves. So when we did Aspire, that word came up a lot in the beginning. A lot. And people are like, opinions. And Spring Boot came up a lot too. It's like, opinions. We must have opinions. And that makes the team that built one of the most extensible stacks on the planet like uncomfortable. What do you mean, like, opinion? Do you mean they can't change it? That's not, like, nobody wants that. What we want are smart defaults that you can override. We don't want like traps.
That's exactly what I would I think I should have called it that way. Would have been just like defaults that like this is how it comes out of the box. These are really smart defaults is a good way of putting it.
It's like, I think we call it a paved path. Like, if you stay on the paved path, a lot of things just work. Doesn't mean you can't get off of it, right? But we're trying hard to keep you on this steady path and give you knobs to change every layer. Because we avoid cliffs. When we draw the API at the end state and we say, like, this is a beautiful API, then we think, okay, you're going to want to change this part, the binding, validation. So you're trying to figure out in that beautiful end state picture, how do you let people kind of get in between and change things, yet not screw the whole design to make it super complex, right? And this is the hardest part about trying to explain design to people. It's an art. Like, experience combined with, like, taste. Like, you have to kind of know, I guess, from doing it over and over, what's a good design? Does it scale from, like, 0 to N? Minimal APIs was fun because we were trying to be express, right? It was like, let's copy that pattern where you're, like, handler, functional, and you look at the first year of feedback. It was like, oh my gosh, we're going to have spaghetti in .NET. The program is going to be full of things. And in my head, I'm going, if you make a separate class and you put stuff over there, you can still factor your code the way you want to do it. But people really can't see past like the default template or the default experiences. So it's kind of this mixture of like, how do you show people that it can be small, that it can be well factored, without kind of baking it into the core system. It's a tough thing to manage.
I'm smirking right now because that was actually the last thing I was going to talk about, kind of as like an aside to that. But I'll get into it to begin with, which is a lot of I have trouble with templates. For that reason, which is, and I have trouble with this on pretty much any sample or anything that I show, which is I'm usually trying to illustrate something that is, it's not, like there may be a pattern or something I'm trying to explain, but I'm not going to do it in the context of some overly complex domain that nobody's going to understand unless I sit down and talk about it for an hour.
Yeah.
So you end up showing kind of very simple
snippets.
Yeah, and you're applying something that has no business being there, and you can say that, but that's kind of what I feel like is that there's a lot of, okay, here's a sample, but you got to look past it, fit it in your own context, and that doesn't happen, and then that's where the comments like minimal APIs, that's what I was thinking about yesterday when I was thinking about having this conversation was everyone was up in arms about this was going to be, it's like you can still use MVC, you can still move that out, like nothing's stopping you from it looking like the initial sample.
Yep.
But
we had one of our new PMs. Hey, Mike. He came in the chat like this year, and he was like, "We need to have a sample that shows you how to structure minimal APIs." And I said, "Why?" And it's because it's the most common complaint. Show us how to make the code look nice, right? And I'm like, I get that. We should do that on the docs somewhere. But like, the funny thing about the template, why we were so hardcore on changing it, was we wanted that 2, 3, 4 years in, all of the default samples showing .NET look simple. Like what happens is people put .NET next to Python and JavaScript, and it scares people away immediately. They're like, this is too complex. There's 7 files and a config file and other files. And it's like, initially, I would say stuff like, of course there are. Like, it needs to be there. And it took even me a while to figure out, if you want to scale up, you can. We don't scale down well. We don't like help you do hello world well and have you crawl up, right? And you could argue maybe it's not important for C# to appeal to that audience. We want it to be structured and well defined and X, Y, and Z. But I'll tell you, 2 years, 3 years into this minimal API thing, there's still fierce debates about minimal versus MVC. But man, seeing default samples in blog posts, in videos, looking super simple is like a joy.
Yeah.
It's like yes.
So back to Aspire.
Yep.
Where, like, based on the feedback you've gotten, where do you see it right now in terms of adoption? Do you feel like it is, in terms of greenfield, existing projects, are people moving to it, even though they have a mod, like it's still in .NET 9, but but they are, say, it's like they've been crawling up, like mine originally started. My project's 10, 11 years old. We started in 4.6, and we upgraded all the way along the way.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so do you see, like, where do you see the adoption in it?
So it's funny. I would say when we started off, we were like, oh, it's a dev story. It's really good for dev. People showed us how good it was for onboarding. Like, we had an inkling. Like, yeah, this is really useful for, like, F5. But people took it to the next level, like, basically making that their bootstrap script for F5. So that's where it's been the most successful, like, inside Microsoft, outside, companies adopting it. And it's a really easy way to kind of try it out without much impact to your app. I told someone today that you can kind of model the app host from the outside in. So you have it, like, you add your stuff to it, and you can describe configuration, and you can try it, and there's no harm. Your app didn't change. You're just kind of running a separate thing, right? And the more you learn about it, the more you see the dashboard, the more you want to see telemetry. You opt into these individual parts as you want to grow for your brownfield projects, right? So I think for brownfield, we're seeing people trying to move from, like, what they currently have. They're trying out. They're in the ideation phase. Does it work for me? Does it benefit me? Greenfield, we're seeing people adopt the whole vertical from, like, dev to deployment. And, like, we know deployment is, like, it does, like, one thing really well, right? But recently we had a team inside Microsoft, like a team that we're working on, trying to make Aspire work for internal deployments. And that has informed so much about what we have to build to make it work beyond just this, like, ACD up from the command line. We love showing good demos. We love showing those experiences, but I think we have a better, more clarity on like where it has to go from a framework point of view. And I think in like hopefully in a couple of months you'll see it evolve towards being a more general purpose framework. The reason we have a hard time describing Aspire, and I still do, like today I asked the audience that are using Aspire, can you describe Aspire to me like in one paragraph? And you should see each person like struggle to explain it, right? This is going to be grandiose, so bear with me for a second. What it feels like is a tool chain for your SDLC. So you model your application, and then you run it. You see all the connections, the graphs, the stuff, telemetry, and you're in dev, and you dev, and you're happy. And then you want to test it, so you write a test, and it boosts your application, and you write integration tests, And then you want to deploy it, and you do a test deployment, and you do like, we don't have this command yet, but conceptualize. Aspire deploy, and it goes to some cloud. And fast forward, we have support for every cloud. Every integration is all there. Everyone's building things. It's a good ecosystem. And then you want to repeat, so you want a pipeline. So like, take that same thing and give me a pipeline. And that's like, not the whole thing, but that's like the tool chain that we're building. And it falls out when you have this single sort of truth idea. Like the app host defines stuff and connections. And then what can you do with those things? You can run them, you can test them, you can deploy them. That's the current mental model for what Aspire is kind of growing up into. And it's the way it's happening, I would say, is it's happening because it's being pulled that way, right? We didn't even envision it stretching this far, but I think having done the internal stuff, working with like big enterprises, trying to use it for more deployment stuff, it's like, if we tweak it this way, that it fits. And you're looking for, I told someone, like, we often don't work on verticals because we're doing a class of feature. So you're in your company working on your app. You're not thinking like a platform dev. You're thinking like, I have an app to build. I need to get this thing done. So I have a compose file and a Helm chart and whatever else. And it works fine. Like, it works fine for me. And I'm thinking about every instance of someone like you that has to figure out those 4 things. And I'm like, man, if they did this, it would work for all their classes of problems. So I think that's where the platform framework mindset comes in. Maybe I'm tormented. I'm a tormented soul, but I think that's how I think about things.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You said like people weren't sure how to describe it.
Yeah. I mean, they would use more words than was given. So I say, give me a paragraph, and someone would say, it's composed but in C#. It lets me connect multiple things together to run and see telemetry. It's a dashboard that has telemetry. It's libraries for resilience. And you get pieces.
Because depending on what their context is and how they're using
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
The way I think of it, and this could be way off, but this is just how
Let me hear you. Yeah.
I would, not even a paragraph. I almost have one word, which is like, or two. I don't know which one I'm going to pick. I'm going to say like it's composition.
Yeah. Yes. Someone called it an orchestration framework, and I said if you use orchestration, you're going to make everyone think it's Kubernetes. And it's not.
No, that's why I didn't want to use that word, because there's a connotation with that already.
That's the right word.
I would say composition of some sort. Yeah.
And like of what? And it's of your app.
Yes, it's
all the pieces.
Yeah. Because the funny thing, like a lot of people will say oftentimes, like even in this context, they'll say, okay, like of some type of distributed, like it's like I always say this all the time, like almost every app is distributed. Like you don't need, like you could have a monolith, it has a database, it has a cache, like
exactly.
You know
got
what
it.
I mean?
Exactly.
So,
and I think we struggled because we called it cloud native to begin with, because that was like the thing to do.
Yeah.
And then people were like, I'm on-prem.
Yeah.
I'm not in the cloud. And I'm like, well, it still works for you because it's about
exactly.
composition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
you got it. You're hired.
So to take it a little bit further at Build, there's been a lot of talk, obviously, around agents, and this is kind of immediately my next step on potentially how this goes.
Yep.
Is I'm assuming that fits in the mix of models, MCP servers.
Yep.
How, like, you have some. I'm assuming you already have some idea how that's going to play into this.
We thought about it. So you could think of a couple of, and this is how I conceptualize kind of how AI works now, and it could be wrong. I could be wrong next week. So the podcast is going to go out, and then the thing comes out, and I'm like, oh, no, I'm wrong. But there's models do orchestration. The thing we're trying to do with agents is orchestration. We're trying to figure out how to make it do a set of steps, right? And the difference between an agent and a workflow is like fixed steps versus like the next step can be just determined by the agent itself, right? Depending on what it has to do. And the tools that they use, the MCP servers, all the tool calls are still things we have to build and evolve and make better. I think the biggest danger that I see or threat to kind of like us evolving as a like, engineering community is we stop evolving the tools because we can orchestrate the same tools we have today with AI, right? It's like if I told you deploying to Azure, you use ARM and Bicep, right? This language and the control plane. That's the last control plane you ever need because we can just have AI automate everything else. And I don't like hiding complexity in automation. I still think there's room for abstraction. So we have to find the balance between I can automate an existing process versus we can kind of raise the abstraction level and still do automation, right? It's kind of like trying to mask away a difficult task with 10,000 people working on it. It's like that doesn't super work. So I think we're going through that path with agents right now. It's like, okay, what level of granularity do I have to be specific wise to kind of do the agent? And one of the things I was thinking about was we're trying to replace like entire human tasks with agents. And I'm like, one of my tasks I'll hand off to an agent, like one of 10,000 things that I do. We're talking about like deploying Aspire to NuGet, publishing blog posts, release notes. Just that end to end is like 12 people working on stuff, right? And I don't think it's one agent. I think it's like an agent per workflow.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, that helps me conceptualize what the future could look like. Because it's not like just agent with a person. It's like, no, it's not a whole person. It's like 1,000th of what I do every day for this one thing, right? And I do think there's some tasks that will just completely just be done by these things. But
so one of the things you just said it, and I don't know, I don't know where it fits in this conversation, but I thought it was a really good, because when we started off, I was talking about like, I just want to think how you thought about designing stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always advocate for is just knowing your tools, knowing kind of like at least the level, like whatever you're using. So like my case, okay, I'm using ASP.NET Core. I'm using Aspire. I want to know the tool almost to the point of how it's designed, maybe have some insight of how it's implemented, because when there's issues, you kind of inherently like, a lot of times I tell people like, you don't really even need to go to the docs if you kind of have a sense, or you know how to search for the docs, because you already kind of have a sense of, well, if I were designing it and you're in the same kind of frame, it's kind of inherently, okay, well, that makes sense then you, and that's where I'm really curious of how this is all going to go.
Because, I love it.
Because like, how are the tools working? Like, do you understand what they're doing? So
yeah, and I think the danger there is like people do really cool demos with agents, like doing stuff. I had a heated debate like internally recently, and it was about what did the agent spit out. So it's like, I want to do a deployment. I want to do these 5 things. I want to have this all working, and it spits it out. I get all this. I call it sprawl. You give me like 4 templates and 5 CI/CD pipelines, all this stuff, and I'm happy, and I ship it, and I'm good to go. And I'm like, what did it do? Is AI going to maintain that? Okay, cool. Maybe that's the future. But until then, yeah.
All right, so I'll end on this. This is I've done a video on this one tweet that you had.
I saw that
probably a year ago, and I don't know how it fits in modern. I still think it does though. But the question, I don't know. You retweeted it, and somebody posted, "What's the biggest scam in software development?" Do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
And you said best practices.
Yep.
And I always say that best practices should be called, maybe it's a good idea given
this context.
Yeah. Right. So, what made you even think of that? Does it go back to the, like when we were talking about minimal APIs and
the dogma? I think I have a visceral reaction to software engineers saying it has to be done this way or no way. that really makes me feel like you haven't opened up yourself to more things. It's kind of like if you saw functional programming and you thought that was the only way, and then you saw OOP and you were like, that's the wrong way. It's like, no, they're trade-offs. And I know the meme about it depends, but it depends is legitimate. And I think in your software engineering journey, if you're at the phase where you believe X has to be done and then there's no other way, there's more evolution to learn more things, to kind of like always contextualize your problem. Don't spew dogma as though it is the only way. I think that, so whenever someone says, like, I'll make a joke, clean architecture, fine. I know about the memes and solid principles and all these things. And I love when people talk about applying it, because I don't like when they're missing the why. Missing the why always makes me feel like, man, you're preaching. You're not explaining to me. Like, you didn't tell me the benefit. You didn't help me understand why I want to do this and why it's beneficial. And then talk about other approaches. When would you not challenge someone who believes in this like only way to say, when would I not use this thing? And I think that is when you get the honest opinions about, okay, maybe in this case it's not great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. A lot of that stuff, it comes down for me is it can almost, at least in my world, almost all of it boils down to trade-offs. And trade-offs you're making generally around coupling. Almost all the time you can boil it down in around that. So there's a lot of times where it's like, yeah, sure, you could apply this a pattern or apply clean or solid or do something. And it's like, that's great. Is it needed? Do you understand? Okay, I'm coupled to this thing in 2 instances. Okay.
You know what's funny? So
like, do I need?
Does it matter?
Does it matter? No.
In the beginning of Aspire, we were building so much so fast, and one of our engineers was in the mindset of like .NET framework. So he was like, when you build an API, it must be for 10 years. And I said, there's no way. I said, we don't even know what we're building.
Yeah.
We are, I think the meme is you are on the plane and trying to build at the same time, trying to make it work. And I said, we need to be able to defer decisions that will not bring us into a corner. So like, for everything you think we have to make for 10 years, can we mitigate it in some way so we aren't like gonna be hurting in 10 years, right? So like, one piece of the art is what things can you defer? What things matter now? Like, what things will burn us in 10 years versus now? And the answer isn't everything. The answer is like really some percentage of your problems are big ones and some are small ones. And the trick experience, whatever you want to call it, is the art is figuring out which ones you can defer and which ones you have to do right now, right? There are things we punted in Aspire first version that we have to fix now because it's growing. And now, okay, we have to figure out X. But that was deferred for a year so we could build more stuff.
Yeah.
And it didn't hurt us at all. It was like an intentional deferring of this design because we had to do something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I really appreciate you doing this. It was good to get like in your head a little bit.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it was perfect. Appreciate
That's great.
it. All right. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks to David for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. Thank you to Richard Campbell for inviting me to do these interviews and Microsoft for hosting me.